Okay, this one's for all the guys in the room. Let's talk about masculinity. Because this is obviously a talking point in culture right now, but I do think it is a conversation that needs to be had in a maybe more calm, deliberate, but I think also direct kind of way. And this is coming up specifically because I recently posted a video about the Lord's Prayer. It was a clip from one of my sermons. Now, as happens on YouTube, someone came along in the comments and they said, a father is someone who protects, provides, and needs to be obeyed. The message is clear. Mothers don't protect and provide, fathers do. Therefore, God is masculine, not feminine, and there's no need to shy away from it. Now, first of all, that's patently untrue. There are both masculine and feminine metaphors for the divine in Scripture. And yes, God does have attributes that have been historically coded as masculine, but those are not the only attributes of God. And we have to remember that we are men and women made together in the image of God, not the other way around. So remaking God in our imagination of what a quote unquote man should be, I mean, that's just idolatry by another name. In fact, what passes for masculine historically has always been shifting and evolving depending on the culture within which that masculinity is expressed. So when the scriptures use either a masculine or a feminine metaphor to describe God, even those are not objective fixed categories. They are gendered expressions that come from within the particular culture that was expressing them. And yes, in saying that, I am acknowledging that gender is at some level a social construct. However, at the same time, I think it's also patently true to say that there are biological factors at play in our identities. Men are, on average, not always, but on average, bigger and stronger. They have different hormonal balances, including more testosterone than women. And all of that plays into shaping both our actions, our identities, but also the social expectations that then drive and refine those biological starting points into ever more tightly defined categories and expressions. Now, a lot of that has been shifting lately in our culture. And for many of us, that's a good thing, because it's an acknowledgement that not everyone fits as nicely and neatly as we might hope into those lines that we have drawn for them. And I think that making room for people to be unique, to express themselves in ways that feel true to them, even if that doesn't conform to the expectations around them, I think that is a positive for men, women, for everyone. You don't have to deny social and human norms to acknowledge and allow individuals to step outside of them from time to time. Maybe we just don't need to tightly prescribe everything for everyone. But this has also led to a lot of consternation from particularly men who are feeling a little bit lost. Specifically, I think a lot of men who find themselves up against or feeling attacked by this phrase that we hear a lot in culture today, which is toxic masculinity. Now, setting aside the fact that toxic masculinity is not a synonym for masculinity, let's talk about some of these pillars of masculinity that get thrown around in these conversations and how as men we can lean into them, and as men we should be working to avoid the worst of them. Because the three ideas that I keep see popping up in online discussions of masculinity are that men lead, protect, and provide. And I'm actually happy to talk about those categories as long as we acknowledge that none of them are exclusive to men. I work alongside one of the best leaders that I've ever seen in any context, and she just happens to be a woman. Any man who has not seen the way that the mother of his children will protect them fiercely has not been paying attention at all. And when it comes to providing, I lead a large faith community here at Commons. And so there are many, and I mean many women in our church who are doctors and lawyers and entrepreneurs who will always and forever make more money than I do as a pastor. Still, these are the categories, at least that get thrown around, so let's talk about them. Because I do understand why men feel sidelined, perhaps, when they struggle to see themselves reflected in these roles specifically. So, leading. One of the biggest problems that I see with the online discourse around men should be leaders is the men making this argument have no idea what leadership actually means. There's this old adage that I've heard for as long as I have been or even aspired to leadership. It comes from the business world, but saying is this, that the best way to tell if you're a leader is to look behind you. If there's no one there, you're just not a leader. Now, what happens for a lot of men today is they look behind them and they realize no one is there. And the truth is they know they're not a leader, but they don't want to take any responsibility for that. They just want someone to blame. So the reason they're not a leader is because women don't want to follow. Or the reason they're not a leader is because men aren't respected in society. The reason they're not a leader is because, well, just society. When the truth is, the reason you're not a leader is because you haven't earned that. People are not obligated to follow you because you're a man, and to be masculine is not to demand that people follow you if they don't want to. Leaders, regardless of gender, help people to see a preferred future, and then they inspire people to get behind them and to make that happen. And it's really just as simple as that. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a corporate setting or work or a church, or let's be honest, even your home. No one is a leader because they said so, because they get to lead. You become a leader as you grow and you learn and you demonstrate that you are someone who is worth following. And in my experience, as a leader of a staff team and a lot of people, is that one of the worst ways to demonstrate that you are someone worth following is just to go around demanding that anyone obey you. We got a lot of men out there screaming, "Respect my authority." And it's actually undermining any possibility that that man will ever become someone who is worth following. So if you want to think yourself a leader, if you want to lead in your home, with your wife, with your kids, at work, and I think you should. I think being a leader is a good thing. And I think there's room for us, all of us, to lead at some level of our lives. Then here's where you start. You serve whoever you want to lead well. Demonstrate over a long period of time that you are worth following. And you do that by piling up examples of your trustworthiness, your wisdom, your steadiness, your consistency. You do that so that the people around you, the people near you, will see you and they will say, "That's someone I want to follow." It really is just as simple as that. All of us can be leaders in some aspect of our lives. I really do believe that. But it doesn't come because we demand it. In fact, the more work you do demanding it, the less chance that anyone will want to follow you. That's the poison that's going to prevent you from becoming the leader you want to be. It's the poison that will prevent anyone from seeing you as a leader. And for men that are not feeling respected or even disrespected, you really need to look at your life and ask yourself why. And then go back to those simple steps. Serve first and see if you can change the narrative around yourself and even the narrative that you've started to buy into. Okay, let's talk about protecting. Men often want to see themselves as protectors, and I get that. I think as men, as human beings, we all want to have some kind of physical prowess. We want to imagine ourselves as strong and capable. And I think we have this instinct to use whatever strength we have, whatever power we have in the world, not just for ourselves, but to care for those around us. That's the heart of being a protector. And I think that is a healthy instinct. I don't think identifying ourselves with protecting and protection is the problem. The problem is how we've come to define that role. Because first of all, a healthy use of masculine strength is to protect those who need it. Now, that might be your family, but it is equally anyone in your social context who is oppressed, marginalized, ignored, overlooked. To elevate that person, that is the purpose of strength. And you often hear, again, in online discourse about a man's role in protecting is a very tight focus on protecting his family. And I'm not saying that's not a part of it, but the way it gets talked about, the focus is not on protecting those who need it. The focus gets turned toward protecting what is mine, my family, my property, which in itself is a real problem because all of a sudden your family, your wife, your kids, none of that should be in the same category as your property. It just doesn't, properly exist there. They are not yours in the sense of ownership. They are yours in the sense of proximity and care. So, for example, there was a lot of talk online recently about the ordo amoris, largely because a politician used it in an inappropriate way. But there is a real and healthy way to talk about the order of our loves. That's what ordo amoris means. I have obligations to my kids and my wife that exceed my obligations to my friends because of the nature of the relationship and the commitments that I've made to them. So as an extreme example here, if I had one morsel of food left in the world, I would give it to my children before my neighbor. But I would not feed my children cake before my neighbor had enough bread. So there are room for levels of relationship in your life, love and obligation, those that you are going to protect above another. But Christianity specifically calls us to then very quickly move past the me and mine against the world attitude that comes very naturally to us, and to, in some sense, supernaturally understand that actually everyone we encounter is our neighbor and they deserve our care and protection as well. If your concept of masculinity means that your protection ends at what is yours, that's a problem in terms of your identity as a protector. But it's also a problem in terms of how you view your relationships and the order of your loves. You're not protecting anymore out of a sense of love. You're protecting out of a sense of ownership. Second, protection shouldn't be confined to this weird fascination that we have in our culture with violence. When I think of myself as a protector, I do not want my mind to immediately jump to fantasizing about finding myself in a violent interaction with an unnamed foe. If it does, then my protection will only ever exist probably in my mind. The truth is, most of us are never going to find ourselves in the situations that we dream about. We're not John Wick. Now, God forbid we ever do, that's fine. There's a place to stand up, to put yourself in harm's way, to protect those who need it. I think it's good and it's healthy then to look after your body, to work out, to be in good shape, even to learn how to defend yourself. But it's not only for that minuscule eventuality. Your whole protection racket, if that whole identity is wrapped up in a fictional encounter that may or may not ever come, then no wonder you find yourself unfulfilled as a man. You can right now protect people around you all the time. You can do it as simply as calling out someone on an insensitive joke, or by ensuring that your kids get outside and don't spend too much time on their iPads. All of that is protection. By being aware, by looking for those near you and around you, those in your community who do not have everything that you've been afforded. And then by advocating for them, using your voice and your power, this can all be ways that you express protection, not just in this fantasy that you have about an encounter that probably isn't going to happen. Buying a gun is not being a protector. Living a life that advocates for and elevates the marginalized around you, that's a pillar of masculine identity I can get behind. Now, the last one here is provider. And one of our problems here is how shallow it is to wrap any identity aspect, but even our identity as provider, into our bank account. I mean, how much money do we make? What can we buy? That is not what it means to provide. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't work to look after ourselves and those we care about. Paul famously talks about those who don't work, well, they don't eat. Now, that's not a universal statement, and our humanity is not ever tied up in our productivity. So there are a number of very reasonable reasons that any person may not be able to work. You don't even always need to know those reasons. Being a man is not looking at someone else and deciding what they should be doing. It's looking at yourself and deciding how you want to live. But as a generalized statement, I think it is important for many of us as men to see our work as part of something that's purposeful. And providing is part of that. So we don't work just to fill up our bank accounts. We work to look after ourselves. We work to look after those that we care about. And I think that's often what gives meaning and purpose to our careers. You don't need to have some incredible noble objective to your work. I don't think you want a job that pushes the world in negative directions. But if the outcome of your work is simply that you provide a good, stable, healthy life for yourself and for those near you, that in itself is noble work. Work is a good thing. Taking pride in your work is a good thing. Earning a living based on your good work is a good thing. And I think that can be one facet of how you imagine yourself as a provider. But if it takes over, that's always going to end up in uglier places. Because our identity needs to expand beyond just work. When I think about providing, I think that is so much more than just the bills that I pay. I provide for my kids because of the work that I do and the money that I make that pays for the mortgage, for the house that we live in. But I also provide for my kids when I make sure that I come home at the end of the day with enough energy left to hug them properly, to play with them, to talk with them, to do some homework with my son or take my daughter for a bike ride, which she seems to want to do every day these days. Because the truth is our family lives a pretty modest lifestyle. We have 4 of us and we live in a house that's less than 1,000 square feet. I drive an old car and my kids are never going to get every toy that they want. That's not to say that we're hard done by. It's not my point at all. I'm incredibly grateful for the living wage that I am able to earn the community that I serve. My point is, what I will provide for my kids over the course of their lifetime will swing very hard toward the intangible and very far away from my bank account. What I provide is so much more than just my monetary value. So to provide space for my son to explore his identity and his masculinity in a way that makes sense for his development as he grows. To provide for my wife the context where we as a family can decide together how we're going to pursue both of our dreams, how we map that agenda. That is part of how I provide. You could have all kinds of cash in your bank account, but never provide a healthy, stable, open environment where those around you can open themselves to you, share their aspirations with you, and then be part of jointly charting a course forward toward that together. That's not providing unless you can do all of it. Writing the check is not being the provider. Creating the context for flourishing for yourself, but for your kids, for your family, and honestly, as much as possible for your neighbors in your community. All of that is what it means to provide. And this is where I think a lot of the discourse has really fallen apart. Men are discouraged. I get it. I hear that in my conversations with men because they've heard the conversation in culture and they've internalized it in a way that honestly they shouldn't have. You are not toxic. Men are not toxic. Certain expressions of masculinity that have become culturally dominant, well, those absolutely have become toxic at times, and they have probably bled their way down into all of our lives. And we have to have a discussion about that. But I do agree that a lot of the ways it's been talked about in culture has not delineated clearly enough between toxic patterns and cultural expressions of masculinity and what it means to be a man ourselves. And what has happened in response to that, perhaps to this overly aggressive categorization, is this desire to return to something that honestly a lot of these men have just never earned. Because here's the truth, you don't get to be a leader because you're a man. You become a leader because you cultivate that desire within you through service to those near you. You are not a protector because you bought a gun. You become a protector because you look out for those with less power than you. And you're not a provider because you think women should stay at home so that it's easier for you to get a job. You become a provider when you start to understand what those around you actually need. And then you look for ways to create those opportunities for yourself to serve and for them to flourish. And the problem is you'll get some anonymous dude in the comments saying, and I'm going to quote here, avoiding the clear role of men as patriarchs who give commands and expect obedience. No wonder young men are fleeing the Christian churches in droves. And yet the truth is, in my life, I've adopted 2 children that I have played a part in protecting from very different destinies that could have befallen them. I have provided a stable partnership within which I've been married to one woman for 24 years. I lead a large faith community that has defied expectations for church growth in an urban core in Canada. And I've done all of that as a man without ever giving commands or expecting obedience from anyone. And I firmly believe that the reason young men are fleeing Christian churches is men who demand the world and have not yet earned any of it. Because again, the problem isn't masculinity. The problem is this caricature of what a man is supposed to be. And we need to do better. And it starts not with demanding our place at the table, but earning everything that we aspire to. Now that happens when we find spaces where we can be open with each other, not anonymous in the comment section on YouTube. And if you made it this far through the video and you're part of our community, we have a healthy masculinity course that Scott leads, and we're continuing to develop and refine. There are spaces in your life where you can cultivate good, healthy relationships with other men. I've played hockey with the same guys for 10 years now, and a lot of it is joking around in the locker room, but some of it is the space with which over time we have learned that we can trust each other. And we can talk about how our kids are doing, how our marriages are developing, how we see ourselves, our careers, and who we want to become and how we want to get there. All of those types of conversations are important to us because masculinity is not defined by what we demand or what we think is owed to us. It's defined by the way we shape ourselves as men for who we want to be. Masculinity is kind of up for grabs. And if you want it to be something positive, you've got to make that happen. So get out there, serve well, be less anonymous, make friends, open yourselves to this journey of what it means to be a man and the way that you are going to make your masculinity a force for good in the world.